everybody. It's Aaron Christensen with Horror 101 with Dr. AC, and we're going to be rejoining our double feature from Belgium. We're going to be talking about To Die For and To Die For 2, Son of Darkness, and here to share his thoughts about the two To Die For films is my good pal, Gert Verbeeck. Come on in, Gert.
Hello, good afternoon from Brussels.
And good morning from Chicago.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I'd forgotten about daylight savings time, and so we're closer together now than we've ever been. Yeah.
Indeed.
So kind of to set people up again, way back in 2012, 2013. When I was over visiting Brussels for the International Film Festival there, happily known as the BIFF, you had shared some of your titles with me, and I've been working my way through this care package, and we came across another double feature, the To Die For films. Tell me a little bit about your introduction to them, because this was the first time I'd seen them.
Well, yes, indeed, and about me sharing some titles and doing the care package, I distinctively recall that you were also interested in the stuff I was watching when I grew up that you didn't know about, and hence these two titles came up. So I'm sorry for that. But you sat through them right now?
Absolutely. Well, and the funny thing is I do remember seeing these titles on the shelves, and it was kind of in the wake of, that kind of rush of vampire films after Fright Night and Lost Boys and Near Dark. Like, it kind of came out when vampires were hot again.
Et voila, you mentioned it already. That was the thing, because when you think about the 80s, the quintessential ones, you mentioned Fright Night, Lost Boys. I would mention a third one, Vamp.
Okay, sure.
But when these titles came out, I was too young to watch them. I wasn't allowed. I had to wait until cable television and all that. So why do I have a fondness for To Die For? It's because I watched that one before I got to see Fright Night, The Lost Boys, and
oh wow! So this was kind of your one of the first adult vampire films.
Well, yeah. It was my introduction to the American style of vampires from the 80s, more specifically.
Sure, yeah.
I got exposed to Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee as a kid on late night television, just bits and pieces. So voila. But that was my point about how I came to like To Die For back in the days. It was on the video rental shelves. One of those first times that I was allowed to rent movies and all that. Now here's the deal: Warner Brothers was a quality, a big name Hollywood studio, but they didn't have much horror titles.
Yeah, other than The Exorcist back in the 70s, But I wouldn't say that I would identify them as a horror studio. No,
voila.
Not like a Lionsgate or
So I distinctively remember a lot of Warner Brothers horror titles on the video shelves, and I already knew along the years, okay, these weren't produced by, but right. What they did apparently was from the late 80s to the early 90s, they picked up a lot of independent films and marketed them for foreign distribution on the video rental markets.
Okay.
And that's how they came to be on our shelves. Now, I did a bit more digging. Apparently, most of these were only released here in Belgium and Holland. And
really?
Some of them, they had some distribution deal with Finland, I think, also. All those titles, of which To Die For was one of them, were just suddenly popping up in the video stores here next to the big name Warner Brothers titles. So you were thinking oh, these are quality films. Let's rent. Right. I mean, I was a little kid. What do I know? And the cover arts got a bit redesigned and all that, luring the viewer in, especially when you're a kid. It's I got to see this. And that's how it came to be.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the story for To Die For, the original one from 1988, it's kind of a basic retreading of Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. We have a nobleman from is he from Romania? I think he's anyway, he's from one of the Eastern European countries.
Yes. Well,
and he meets up with a woman who happens to be a real estate broker. He's looking for a place to stay. So, I mean, in that regard, I mean, you see them kind of like following the beats of the original Dracula story. And you have a Mina character, you have a Lucy character, it all kind of tracks. And you have John Carl Buechler's, makeup effects. And then they add in the kind of other element of a long lost love, and you have kind of a rival vampire as well. So I think that's kind of what distinguishes To Die For from being just a straightforward Dracula redo.
And the interesting thing also is, I think the films, it's an educated guess, but the working title might have been Dracula, The Love Story. And that was before Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula came out.
Right.
Because the rights of the film were credited to a company, copyrighted to Dracula, The Love Story. So right.
I mean, we've got our main cast, and none of them have gone on to do a lot of stuff. There's some soap opera work that they've done, things like that. The one notable exception, of course, is Amanda Weiss, and the horror fans will recognize her from Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, she's the one that consistently grew a bit of cult status from in genre movies. I don't know if you have anything to add about the cast members that struck you.
I don't.
Well,
because mostly I found our lead actor Brendan Hughes kind of lacking in charisma, shall we say.
I would agree. I mean, I can see why they cast him, because he's got this face you want to like, or it's like a more gentle version.
Yeah,
I mean, he
sure.
wants to be not the mean vampire, but he's in inner conflict all the time because his brother shows up and the anger rises again and things like that. Seems like it.
Well, I mean, our Steve, we have Steve Bond, who plays kind of like you said, the evil brother, and turns out, I mean, his name is Vlad. Vlad Tepes is the Dracula character, and then his brother. What's his brother's name? His brother's name's Tom, which is so kind of like you got Vlad and Tom. It's like
Tom. So Tom is Steve Bond, and Vlad Tepes is played by Brendan Hughes.
Right.
Who kind of did some smaller roles in bigger films afterwards. And I will spoil it already for the sequel. He's the only cast member who doesn't return. There's five members who return for the sequel. So
I know. Well, we will talk more about that. We will talk more about that when we get to the sequel. But anyway, so I mean, the one other cast member worth noting is that we have Dwayne Jones from Night of the Living Dead, showing up briefly in a cameo as our heroine, Kate, played by Sidney Walsh, as Kate's boss. And on the one hand, it's kind of like, well, that's cool seeing Dwayne Jones. On the other hand, they do nothing with him at all. And I'm like, it feels like a cameo of the most pointless.
He has one scene. I mean, it's like Brian James in the first Scanner Cup movie.
That's right. You're like,
got him. Give him a scene.
Why did you bother? But okay, thanks.
The lead actress is remind me of her name again.
Sidney Walsh.
Yeah, she's kind of. I mean, she's walking us through. I won't say she's carrying the movie, but she's walking us through the movie.
Oh she's our main character for sure.
Yeah. Well, one of the highlights, maybe not from his entire career, but in this particular film at least, is John Carl Buechler, his effects.
I've heard it said both ways, so I'm going to say I'll say Buechler and you say Buechler, and one of us will be right.
Again, the guy does so many things. He goes the extra mile with or without a budget. What I liked he reinvented how the teeth of the vampire should look like, because that was something new. I had not seen that in '88. And then Vlad Tepes' demise at the end.
Right.
He pulled some punches with that too. Giving us a staple of the late '80s special effects techniques with the face melting scene.
Yes, there are these bright moments throughout, and I'd say that, you know, as I mentioned off camera, I wasn't a huge fan of this film, but there are some bright moments throughout, and I would say that is one of them. Steve Bond is an interesting. He does an interesting job, because there's times when he's very effective, and then there are times where he feels like way over the top, and he's like coming in from a different movie.
I will comment on him a bit more when we get to the sequel. But in terms of, I mean, it's supposed to be a horror film. Yes, it's a doomed romance kind of thing also, which was in flavor during the late '80s and early '90s. Now, when we talk about it being a horror movie, it's not that effective in being scary.
No.
However, there was one scene that I remembered, and now rewatching it, I mean, it has less effect, but it's still the one scene that kind of qualifies for being a horror movie.
I mean, I'm guessing it's the first kill, you know, with the guy in the car. No,
but it's kind of cool, but it's
I mean, as far as if you're talking about a horror, because I mean, we have a guy who gets, you know, it's the first time we see the monster. It's the first time, you know, we see somebody being murdered on screen. So I think that's why I was thinking that. What's your pick?
Well, it's kind of like, it gets your attention, that first scene. No, the scene where they enter the morgue at night to find out what happened to his character. That was kind of what happened there. Was like, finally, I'm watching a horror movie.
Yeah, no, I agree. Although that does bring up kind of like, there's kind of a cheapness to it. Like, it feels low budget in some regards. I would say that the John Carl Buechler effects are probably the high point, but even those feel kind of like they happened over here and then got inserted into the movie. Like, they don't necessarily feel like they're part of the, like there's a scene where they're trying to saw off, you know, a vampire's head, but then it comes back and like the wound is gone. And, you know, it's like, there was just a few things that feel like attention was not necessarily paid.
Indeed. Yeah. And lack of attention resulted in lack of tension also a lot of the time.
Well, that was something that I felt like, as I mentioned before, with his effects, like you're meant to think that Steve Bond is, you know, turning into the monster, but, you know, like, because the teeth are really cool
in the first one,
but it feels like, you know, like they're insert shots for some of them, you know, like it's like you see this monster and you're like, is that supposed to be one of the vampires? Because it looks nothing like either of them.
But indeed, I mean, it's more the practical way that they shot and edited the film. There are a couple of shots that you can clearly see, like, okay, this was John Carl in the studio making insert shots because the director needed them for certain other scenes.
Right. That's totally what it feels like.
But then there's other scenes that they kind of pulled some punches, like the little showdown in the bedroom with the two brothers. Yeah. One goes floating and gets impaled, spiked on one of the bedpoles. That was a cohesive scene.
Yeah, agreed.
And I had to rewind one shot. I'll just tell it anyway, shattering my childhood memory of it. I mean, that scene works. But now, if you see the one shot, it's like, oh, the forced perspective. Instead of like hanging on a wall, he's clearly standing in front of a wall. And that pole is like aiming at his chest. Like, obviously, I didn't notice that as a kid. But now it's like, nice trickery. But here's another thing. Interestingly enough, when we're watching it now in this day and age, you mentioned the opening scene. It gets intercut with a party happening on a boat. Right. I was thinking like, whoa, the dialogues, the characters, that would so not fly anymore in this day and age.
Right.
I mean, basically all the men are a-holes. I mean,
well, yes. Well, you kind of, that's a great point, because like, I think we're not really left with anybody to root for, you know, like if our Dracula character is the most appealing male character, and even he's not that appealing, you know, we're left with kind of our not necessarily ditzy, but she's kind of like a little strung out in terms of our heroine, you know, Sydney Walsh's character.
Yeah. Kate in the film, right?
And I thought it was very funny that she must have really signed that no nudity clause, because like there's a lovemaking scene, but she's working so hard on keeping that sheet right in place and make sure nothing happens. Like I'm just like, oh man, do you not know it's the 80s? Do you not know you're in a low budget, you know, horror film?
But then again, still I mean, it is an enticing scene, I would say, especially when, remember, I saw this before Fright Night. And,
for sure.
Yeah. Now, the other thing about the annoying male characters there, I mean, Steve Bond is okay. He's supposed to be the bad vampire, right?
Right.
But Scott Jacoby, I mean, he's so annoying. Yep. Like it's on the verge of arresting her, like not accepting that she broke up with him and she wants to be friends. Right. And he keeps being obnoxious all the time.
Well, and he's our hero. He's our Van. He's like our Van Helsing.
It's like he's supposed to go. Well, luckily he doesn't save her in the end.
No, right.
But we're kind of, you know, expected to believe that he will. Well, he got onto things first, like something's going on,
right?
And that's another funny thing. Seeing it now as opposed to back then, or even back then already. At some point, there's like Scott Jacoby there. He the whole thing that he figures things out. So he's got this ancient book. He's reading in it, and then suddenly he's like, "Oh, Vlad Tepes. Oh, he was this." And we as a viewer, we go like, "Yeah, it's Vlad the Impaler."
It's like, did you not know this?
Oh my god! And he's like, "Oh, so amazed," and then he has to do something about it. Yeah,
right. I mean, we understand there's like a certain bit of exposition that has to occur for anybody who doesn't know who Vlad Tepes is. But at the same time, you're just like, wow, okay, we're going to retell the entire Dracula story now. And then, you know, Amanda Weiss's character she has a boyfriend, Mike, who's also just not attentive. He's like all the men are just kind of terrible in this movie.
Her boyfriend is like sobbing all the time, like she doesn't notice me anymore. We're supposed to get married. Of course, she's been bitten by Vlad, and you know.
Right. So anyway, I mean, there are things about this movie that I can see where they were going, but I don't know that it gels 100%. And when it was over, I was like, okay, well, that was a fine low budget effort. But then to hear that there was a sequel made 3 years later, I'm like, wait, did this movie make money? Was there an audience for this movie that we have in 1991, Son of Darkness, To Die For 2? I was like, okay, you know. So tell me about that one. Did you see both of them like right off the bat, like back to back?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
So how I came to discover that it had a sequel. Again, it was a friend and me going to the video store, and there I saw this thing, a vampire movie, which I had never heard of. It was named Son of Darkness. I took the cover and I read the fine print with the credits like To Die For 2. And then it jolted my memory, like, wait, really? So I had the same reaction, like surprise, like you did, but you know, in real life in the video store. So I took it home and I watched it.
So let's talk about the sequel because we have several characters who we see explicitly die in the first one, and yet somehow they show back up again.
You're right. 4. Now, okay, I'll answer that right away, because when you told me that, off record, I was like, yeah, you got a point. I never figured that one out either. But now I paid attention to your inquiry.
Okay.
And remember, you've seen all the Hammer movies with Christopher Lee.
Yeah.
You can imagine how many ridiculous ways they found to resurrect him. Now, if your answer is in those Hammer movies, because some character says it.
Sure, but we never see this is, I guess this is the thing, is that they never bother to explain how this character came back, this character came back. We see them die. We see them disappear, and there's never any explanation. And usually in the Universals, in the Hammers, they make an effort at least to explain how, like there's a scene in, Scars of Dracula where, like a bat comes along and like pukes blood on the ashes, and he comes back.
There you go. It's what I wanted to hear.
Yep.
There is Scott Jacoby returns in the sequel, right?
Yes.
He actually gives the explanation.
All right.
Like, what happened to Vlad, his remains? Oh, apparently there was
not Vlad.
Blood on it.
Not Vlad. But it's these other two.
Voila, but for the other two, it doesn't work. Even for Vlad, it doesn't work because they all die the same way and they vanish. Like,
yes, right.
Where did they go to? There's another dimension where the vampires come from. You never know. It's like these lights and poof, and they're gone.
I know.
And then in the sequel, we get the explanation told, like not shown. Like, yeah, a nurse dripped some blood on the remains. Like, what remains? Oh, there were some ashes, maybe. Okay, I can fly with that.
Okay.
So if that works with Vlad, I guess we have to assume or take for granted that it works for all the others who died too.
But the idea, the coincidence, you're asking a lot. That like not just one, not just two, not just three, 4 characters that we see die are revived by some magical drops of blood, that happen to be conveniently.
Some ashes that are still supposed to be there.
But I mean, that's the thing. Like, we have our here. I'll throw up our spoilers banner just so we could say some names.
We spoiled everything already.
Amanda Weiss's character, like she comes back, but I don't know what she's trying to do. I mean, and I'm not sure what Steve Bond's character is really trying to do. Like, Steve Bond's character Tom is trying to get vengeance against his brothers still.
It's been like that for centuries.
And the premise is that Kate from the first film and Vlad had a baby, and that baby was then given up for adoption. And now Steve Bond wants to take the baby and turn it into like an evil vampire.
Do you mean Steve Bond?
Yes. Like, what does he want?
I don't know. He's got a beef with his brother like forever. But okay, talking about Steve Bond, what I liked is that he got way more comfortable in his role as like being wicked.
Yes. No, he was definitely enjoying the villain character. I would say perhaps enjoying it too much at times.
For sure. So no, you were going down the motivations, like Scott Jacoby returns. Yes. His motivation, I don't know. He's just like really, really obsessed of figuring it all out and telling it to everybody, and nobody believes him.
Well, because Kate went into an insane asylum, so I think that's kind of his emotional spin in it.
Well, it's in sync with the character from his first film. I mean,
right?
He couldn't accept that she dumped him, and now he can't accept that she had a breakdown. And
Vlad is back, but now he's named Max Schreck, which is the actor who plays Count Orlok in Nosferatu from 1922, and you're like, it's like, it feels kind of cute, like they're trying to make a reference and they're trying to be cool, but I'm like, oh, you could have been a little more subtle about it. And it's played by a different actor, Michael Praed, who is an actual Englishman, because Brendan Hughes, God love him, he cannot do an English accent to save his life. And so it's nice to have Michael Praed doing an actual English accent, but it's also, again, and he has more charisma than Brendan Hughes for sure. I can't say that I cared much more about this version of Vlad than the last one, but he at least has more energy.
Yes, and again, they tried to like rewrite him as with the first film into making him a good character. I
Right.
mean, he's like a humanitarian, even like he becomes
Yeah.
a doctor. He wants to save people, but also help his vampire
Well, also,
acquaintances. Give him.
I mean, he becomes a doctor like in a year because I mean, this kid's only like a year old, and like so he's become a doctor and he's given up on any kind of like vamping, and he drinks all his blood from the blood bank. And I'm like, wow, okay, he underwent a big change of heart there.
It's a big stretch since the first film, for sure. And I noticed also that the writer of the first film, Leslie King, returned for the second one.
Yep.
Who Leslie King was also, I mean, she did a bit of acting, writing, producing, directing also. And she did one of her first small roles was in the movie Jennifer, from the 70s. Like it's kind of this paranormal Carrie kind of thing. But anyway, she moved on to writing. Now we kind of get to the point now that you've been wondering all along. It's like, how this sequel? Why?
Right. Tell me why.
Well, I mean, it's educated guesses, of course, but
yes.
The one person responsible was Greg H. Sims. I mean, it's even the first one got presented with the opening credits, a Greg H. Sims presentation. Right. The second one too. So it's clear that he kind of brought them all back together. And my second educated guess is Sign of the Times. I mean, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula got released
in 92.
Just 1 year after. Probably the in-production developments were like already going on for a year or two.
I would say that we had. I mean, To Die For clearly made some money because most direct-to-video titles were making money either at home or on the foreign market. So I'm sure there was money to be had. I don't know that anybody was clamoring for a To Die For sequel, but I could see them saying, okay, we can make a little bit more money on this. It won't cost much. We'll bring back, half the cast from the first one.
Voila. And again, as of the 80s, on to in the 90s, the vampires never died. They were always probably the most profitable creatures of the night from cinema, home video cinema also.
Yeah,
I mean it's kind of like a safe bet to make a sequel to a vampire movie.
Yeah, for sure.
One of his first films that he produced was Return to Horror High, I think, which is kind of a bit of, it has its fans for sure. And then right after the To Die Force, he pulled the same stunt with like The Fear.
Yeah, the wood demon.
With Morty, the slasher, the wooden slasher, with a cameo from Wes Craven. And then for some reason, that movie got a sequel as well, like 2 years later. It's like, okay.
And I've never seen those two movies. I've not seen The Fear or The Fear 2. I do remember the cover art, and I'm like, that's kind of cool, but I never got around to actually renting them.
That might make an interesting double bill to see how that goes down with you.
Yeah, for sure. I know you want to talk a little bit about the directors of the two respective films. The only thing I've seen from the first Deran Sarafian, the only thing I've seen of his was the Jean-Claude movie that he did.
Yeah, well, that figures you had your Jean-Claude binge, like
right, exactly.
Well, like educational study of his work, I would say then, retrospective wise. No, he's a kind of an interesting. He had an interesting career so far. I mean, his most popular film is probably Terminal Velocity with Charlie Sheen and Natasha Keith, because I remember that one having a very wide release, theatrical also, and he seemed comfortable in doing genre movies. Deran Sarafian, early in his career, before the big thing with Terminal Velocity happened, and I think before, To Die For happened, he hooked up for some reason, I don't know how, with some Italians to go over there and shoot a post-apocalyptic action sci-fi adventure movie, teaming up with our good friend Claudio Fragasso,
Ah,
If that doesn't raise your interest, I don't know what will. So you can imagine the input from all those elements, what kind of like, what the result may be. It's bonkers, ridiculous, hugely entertaining, and it stars what's his name again from the first and the second Reanimator?
oh, Jeffrey Combs?
No, the the younger guy,
Bruce Abbott.
Bruce Abbott. There you go.
The lead
So
guy
take
in
all those
Reanimator.
elements together, and you might want to call up John for a turkey event evening next time.
And then our director of the sequel, David Price. Did you have some things you wanted to say about him?
No, but just by looking it up, it kind of, I mean, he was pretty young when he did. It was one of the first films. And for many directors, it's like sequels are the way into, I guess, you know, in America, into the business.
Yeah, for sure.
Start there and move on. And he did, I mean, he continued that a little bit. I think right before or after he did the very first Children of the Corn sequel, like almost 10 years after the original. Everybody was waiting for it, of course. He needed to have a Children of the Corn too. And what else did he do? He did more genre stuff, no?
I think I honestly haven't looked up too much because he didn't impress me too much here for me to go, let me go see what else. The one thing you did, so one element that both of us pointed out was that we like the scores for both of them. The first one was Cliff Idleman, and tell me a little bit about like your impressions of that initial score, because Idleman his initial one that kind of people know about was he did Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, and then from there he went on and did like Triumph of the Spirit and this film.
The score is quite remarkable for this type of film because it elevates things a little bit. They add a certain grandeur, dramatic touch to it. It feels pretty orchestral. And I mean, like the first film, the opening tune, it reminds me of these erotic suspense movies like Basic Instinct. In that sense that, I mean, in terms of composer colleagues that they both reminded me of. I had to think of Daniel Licht. I forgot. I'm spacing out on the names. Christopher Young, I think, who did like Hellraiser. But if you look up those scores, they have kind of like the same quality to it, like elevating dramatics, a sense of grandeur and suspenseful eroticism. I don't know how to call it, but definitely it's one of the assets of the film. Yeah. I'm talking only about the scores when you listen to them. I'm not really saying like how they chose to apply it in the movie. That might misfire somehow or not, but if you listen to the score from To Die for Two, Son of Darkness by Mackenzie, I think.
Yeah, you
put that thing on and just roll with it, and you have a grander thing than the actual film turned out to be. That is
agreed. That definitely helps kind of like boost the quality overall. So again, this is and you know, kind of when you saw these as a kid, obviously when you come back to it later, you know, there's a different perception of it. You've seen more films, and
absolutely
you're able to see that like, okay, this, you know, this is more following the footsteps of Fright Night, Lost Boys, etc., as opposed to being, you know, the kind of the vanguard of it.
Yeah, well, what I noticed is like I mentioned for the first film already, is like there was stuff rubbing me the wrong way. Now it's like the characters, how they behave. It's like, no, you can't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. And then for the second one, I kind of liked it that you could see like we're trying to do a serious film here, but then you have Steve Bond like having too much fun with his evil villain role, right. And I mean, yeah. How does that rub off or actually work? Maybe not very well. Yeah. The only difference between the two is like the first one looks pretty late 80s, and the second one looks early 90s. There's a bit of difference in look and feel. And also John Carl Buechler's, his makeup effects have changed. They toned it down a bit in terms of like, in sense with like, let's keep it serious, not over the top, not too cheesy. Again, does it work? I don't know.
Yep, exactly.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
Cool. Well, I'd say and that's a good place for us to kind of wrap it up, because these are two movies that were kind of doing their best within their limitations. I think they managed the job. I don't think they are necessarily going to be anybody's favorite vampire film, but they're worth checking out.
Who knows? Give it a couple of years, and maybe Vinegar Syndrome or somebody else releases them restored as a double bill. I mean, those things happen.
It could happen. So that is our recap of To Die For and Son of Darkness, To Die For 2. We will see you next time. We'll see if it's a double feature or if we'll focus on a single film. Until then, keep searching, keep exploring, keep sharing the scare.